Massachusetts has had one of the highest unemployment rates as a result of the pandemic. 300,000 residents don't feel that they can pay their rent next month. 65,000 children and parents in our city alone are living below the poverty line. Their needs are tremendous as the pandemic continues on, and they simply can't wait. Their needs for food and supplies and services and housing are something that's immediate and urgent.
You're going to see people that have never been homeless before outside. You're going to see people that are struggling with substance abuse and mental health issues. You're going to see young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds outside. You're going to see 60-plus-year-old people. That's one of our most vulnerable groups, that we're concerned about. And you're going to see people sleeping in tents, trying to survive the night.
Communities are in dire need of support. Being born and raised in communities that are impacted by things such as community violence, things such as poverty, it's so important that we address the needs of people from the community so they can excel.
The need has never been greater. The mobilization for food assistance and housing assistance is becoming no different from the way in which the healthcare community had to respond 6 months ago. And so what we're finding ourselves doing is needing immediate aid, infusions of cash and food assistance, preparing for families that are going to be facing eviction.
The stress level that families are experiencing at this time is only exacerbated as time goes on. And the sooner that we can provide resources in place to help families to offset that stress that they're dealing with, the better it's going to be for the families in the long run.
This is a chance for us to really come together and support a community, and we don't want to go back to where we were before the pandemic. This is a chance to really get to work with our community, our residents, other community organizations, and supporters like the United Way to advance the opportunities for residents in this neighborhood.
Our residents definitely cannot wait, and I'm glad the United Way has that slogan, our communities can't wait, because right here, right now in the city of Chelsea, people are desperate and need help. So we're trying to help them as best we can, doing so with great cooperation from the United Way.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to everyone who has joined us for our Lunch and Learn event with United Way. We're so excited to have you joining us here today for our discussion on Our Communities Can't Wait, United Way's response to COVID-19 on the North Shore. Thanks so much for watching that video to kick off our discussion. My name is Matt Brown. I'm a member of the North Shore Regional Advisory Board, leading the presentation and discussion over the next hour. Before we get started, I just want to thank the entire team at United Way and the North Shore Regional Advisory Board members, many of them who are on the screen here today, for their support in pulling this event together. In addition, just a couple of presentation notes before we get started. If you could put your name and your organization to identify yourself, that would be great. All participants will be muted during our initial presentations over the next half hour, but we'll be having a follow-up discussion after the presentations, and we'll allow all participants to ask questions. If you would prefer to ask questions via chat, that feature is also available throughout the discussion today. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the North Shore Regional Advisory Board within the United Way, and we work to ensure the organization create positive, lasting change in the lives of children, youth, and families in the regions where our members live and work. The purpose of the discussion today here is twofold. One, we'll be hearing from Carly Osceola, Senior Vice President of Community Impact at the United Way, as well as Sarah Bartley, Senior Director of Community Impact at the United Way, and they will be discussing the United Way's response to COVID-19 on the North Shore. And two, I'd like to provide an overview of the leadership group within the United Way called the Leadership Council. For the Leadership Council, we're looking to put together a group of individuals who live or work on the North Shore as our group of future leaders. This group will focus on embracing United Way's core values, such as giving, advocating, and volunteering. As we move to create a Leadership Council, we're striving to create a group that reflects the diversity of who we could be. And as we diversify our human capital, we not only look to increase giving, but increase engagement and participation in the work that we promote, as well as in the organizations that we support. Those who volunteer for this higher level of giving will begin a deeper dive into the policies and partner programs, and campaign events and leadership opportunities. If you'd like to learn more about this new Leadership Council, please don't hesitate to reach out to Nuvia Wallace Davis at United Way. As we all know, The economic and social disruption caused by the COVID-19 health pandemic is devastating. Tens of millions of people are at risk of falling into extreme poverty, while the number of undernourished people has increased significantly. Across the world, COVID-19 deaths continue to rise. In the US, the economic fallout continues to hit low-wage Americans the hardest, along with people of color and those lacking a college degree. 1 in 4 adults have had trouble paying bills, especially rent or mortgage payments. 1 in 6 have borrowed money from friends or gotten food from a food bank. Half of the adults who lost a job at COVID-19 are still unemployed. At the same time, community services are strained, unable to meet demand. Now is the time for global solidarity and support, especially with the most vulnerable in our societies. Only together can we overcome the intertwined health, social, and economic impacts of the pandemic and prevent its escalation into a protracted humanitarian crisis. Fortunately, United Way has been leading the charge in responding to the effects of the pandemic in our local communities. I'd like to introduce one of our speakers to lead our discussion on how United Way is responding to the COVID-19 crisis. Carly Alciello has been with United Way for almost 15 years, including 6 years as the Senior Vice President of Community Impact. She is on the ground level of seeing the devastating impact of COVID-19 on our communities, but more importantly, she and her team are leading the response locally and working with our partner organizations to respond to this crisis. I'd like to welcome Carly to the screen, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Matt. It is wonderful to be here with you all, and it's so nice to see so many friendly faces and our agency partners and other folks who used to work with us. I'm hoping today will be really interesting for all of you and hopefully shed some light on the challenges that we're seeing and also how we're responding. We certainly want to engage all of you in the discussion, so I'm going to be giving some high-level overview. My colleague Sarah Bartley is going to dive into what's been happening on the North Shore, and we certainly would like to hear from our agency partners on the call to give what they're seeing on the ground as well. So I'm gonna jump in, and if we could pull up the slides, I will jump into those. Thank you. So as you heard in the video, our campaign this year is titled Our Communities Can't Wait. And I want to underscore what all of the partners and folks that were speaking were saying, that we really don't see this as a tagline. We are putting it out there as a call to action and a reminder that as we move from relief to recovery, we can't leave anybody behind. We want to really ensure that we are constantly being mindful that although some of us might be recovering and moving on and thinking about going back to work or having kids in school, many, many people in our community are still struggling, and that is going to continue to deepen over the next several years. So I will jump into some headers on that. So you see here some headlines of the crisis, and I want to just dive into each of those and give some other commentary as well. What you're seeing down the bottom here is the unemployment rate from the city of Lynn over the past year. And as you can see in the kind of marker, we saw a peak amongst our priority communities as high as 33% unemployment over the past year, which is really astounding. In Lynn, that peak hit 25.4%. And to give you just, because I know you can't quite see all the numbers, right now, or as of December, the last time the data has been reported, unemployment in Lynn was 9.7% compared to last year at the same time when it was 3.9%. And for folks that might think, well, yeah, you know, in gateway cities, you're really seeing things that way, but maybe not in every community. I'll just give you a couple of other ones. In Beverly, right now, the unemployment rate is 6.2%. December last year, it was 1.9%, and at its peak, it was almost 16%. Gloucester is even more profound. In December, it was 8.2%, but at its peak was almost 20%. So this is certainly a spike that we're seeing across the board in all of our communities. And I'm sure as we get into the conversation later, many of you will have stories of your friends, colleagues, family members who probably have been impacted by job loss or reduction in hours. A couple of other things to think about that go along with unemployment. One is thinking about evictions. In Massachusetts, 80,000 households are at risk of falling behind on housing payments. And again, this is something that has, many people struggle with this, but the profound impact that we're seeing right now is really astounding. As of recently, the Massachusetts Area Planning Council said that approximately 27% of all Mass residents are facing eviction or foreclosure or afraid of falling behind on their payments. Another thing to think about is homelessness. And when we think about the shelters have really had to think differently over the course of this crisis. We've had what's called depopulation. So with COVID, you can't have folks, right next to each other and beds right next to each other. So folks had to think really differently about how to serve homeless populations. And it led to a loss of about 800 beds across the state. One of our concerns is that we don't just want to then focus on rebuilding the shelter system. That's certainly a piece of it, but what we want to see is that we're focusing on permanent supportive housing. And at the end of my comments and Sarah's comments, we'll talk a little bit about a statewide campaign that we are focusing on that wants to ensure that every person, family, young person that is homeless has a plan for permanent supportive housing. So not just staying in a shelter, but staying in their own home. Also, you see a point here around racial and economic inequalities. We know that our Black and Latinx colleagues, friends, residents are experiencing all of these things at rates much, much higher than non-Black, non-Latinx residents. And that's something that we are very much focusing on, especially in communities where that's the population. So what's happening to a full community when those rates are exponentially higher? And finally, we want to think about early education, childcare. As you can see here, the slide says that it's a loss of $250 million. One of the things that we did early on in the crisis was start to engage in calls with early ed, childcare centers, with family childcare. And there was really kind of a state of complete crisis. Not only were they shut down, but they weren't sure how they would be able to sustain their work so that they could reopen. And so that's been something we focused on before this crisis, and now really are focusing on even more, because we know that childcare is going to be the critical indicator to help people get back to work. As someone, probably many of you on the call, and I know my colleague Sarah, I have 2 kids at home right now. They're not young, they're not toddlers, they're school age, but my being able to go back to the office is really hinging on whether they can be back in a setting, childcare, after school, in school, so that they can be safe and learning, and that I can then go back to an office and work. So I think this slide really sums up, why we got into this work, to really help at this moment. The thing that is striking to me is that this is really what United Way has been built for. We're an organization that at its root is all about partnership and bringing people together. I was actually just in a meeting this past week, and we were asked to think about one word to describe our organization. And to me, it was about connection. That was the word that came to mind. We were able to very quickly, just a year ago this week, reach out to our nonprofit partners who really are the best in the entire region, who could jump in. We brought them together with government, with companies, with foundations, and we're able to very rapidly get up and running. As I reflect on, this week last year, I remember, being on Zooms for like 16 hours a day, everyone feeling like you could barely talk at the end because your voice was so hoarse. And we were just trying to think of all the different ways we could immediately jump into action and really help the community that was going to need it. We had no idea at the time what that really meant. It was going to be a month, 6 months, and here we are today. So we didn't really think about, setting a fundraising goal or anything like that. We just reached out and said, please jump in and help us. Your neighbors need you. And we're able to, really quickly, over the course of this whole pandemic, put out $11 million in relief funding. And most of that money went to direct assistance to individuals and families. And as you can see on here, most of them were folks that have had, this is the first time they ever needed this kind of support. We did it, with humility, really listening to our communities and to our local partners to ask them what they thought folks needed and to get it as quickly as we could out to them. We also had so many corporate partners that jumped in, asked what they could do. So we were able to really rally around early ed and childcare, all these different issues to think about how we could do things differently and rapidly in ways that I think prior to pandemic, we haven't really been able to do. I think the pandemic really allowed all of us to just drop any kind of barriers or silos, get in and actually make a difference. And I wanted to end my portion with, that's a picture of me. I think this is just one of the things that, again, I was reflecting on this earlier this week. We brought together my impact staff and we were all reflecting on different things that we did over the pandemic that, we never knew that we would have to do as part of our jobs. And one of them was that over the summer when childcare in schools had to be virtual, the first thing we thought about was how does learning continue if families don't have access to the learning tools that they needed? So what you see here is just a snapshot of bags that we created. So these were early learning kits, and we do lots of kind of take home school supplies, things like that in the past, but this was really different. This was I would say over the course of 2 weeks, Boston Public Schools, one of my partners there, was actually able to get up and running. It was a 5-week early learning curriculum that could be done virtually and that we could order all the manipulatives and supplies for rapidly. So they trained not only the Boston Public Schools staff, they helped us put together this list. We got funding to do it. They also said, this is open source. We want to make sure every community can get this available. And so, we did thousands and thousands of these kids, some for the Boston area, but then particularly we heard there was a need in Lynn. And so that picture that you saw of me, I think it's a slide or two back, was me packing up a van so that we could actually take things up to the Lynn Y and to the Lynn school system. Sorry, I think we're moving up. Maybe, Robin, can you go back to the slide? All right, well, he'll get it back up. When I was telling the story, I was relating to my colleagues about creating these kits. And again, this is something we've done many, many times in the past, but we were putting them into cars. They were going off to different early childhood centers. And then I brought some to Lynn. And in both cases, I got stories related to me. And then I saw this at the Lynn Y. People teared up. It was, and not about, I think it wasn't about getting the supplies. It was about feeling seen in the work and understanding that we cared about their kids. It makes me teary again, because I think these are ways that we all came together to really show that we loved and cared community and wanted to do whatever we could in that moment. So that's my little story here. I'm going to actually turn it over to Sarah Bartley to talk a little further about the work in North Shore.
Yeah, thanks, Carly. So I think actually a lot of you know me, but for those who might not, I'm Sarah Bartley. I'm on our community impact team at United Way. Robin, you can put the slides back up. I'm going to use the next couple. So I'm here on our community impact team. I actually have the privilege of living here in Beverly, so I get to live and work on the North Shore. Just thanks everyone for being here. It's always really nice to be together. I want to just acknowledge as I'm starting, actually a lot of my collaborators in our work in the community are here. I see Yuri and Deb and Fran and Erica and Mikkel. So many of you and Joe, who have been actually just locked in arms with us as we've been responding to our community, and we couldn't do this work without you. So thanks for being here. Thanks for everything that you guys do. I think every day when I wake up into the opportunity to live and work in my community, and to know that those of you who are donors, you're putting your faith in us to take your donations and to make more out of them than what you can give, to make more out of our collective efforts. Like, that really is a trust that you put in us. And so thank you for that. It really is a privilege to get to do this work. Carly mentioned we raised and deployed $11 million in relief. So, I'm here to tell you a little bit about how the $1 million on the North Shore has worked. So if we can put the slides back, I have just a couple of slides that will show you a little bit about what we were doing specifically on the North Shore. So you can go to the next one. So 20 nonprofit partners were distributing about $800,000 to individuals on the North Shore during 2020. Most of it went out during the height of the pandemic. And I'm going to tell you just a couple of stories to give you a sense of who we were helping and how and what kind of a difference it made. Also, relief to family childcare businesses, some of the businesses that are actually the most likely to close, right, as a result of having been closed for so long. And some of the businesses that actually serve some of our most vulnerable kids. We've also supported some alternative learning arrangements for students, particularly in communities like Lynn, where we're learning remotely much longer than some of our other communities. You can go to the next slide. So within a couple of weeks of any of us even hearing of the pandemic and having schools shut down, we established a Lynn Community Care Fund. We worked with a coalition of about 6 organizations, many of whom are here on today, or who we are in contact with on a daily basis. We've had 25 coordination meetings in the last year to really to be building our response together. The gentleman you see on the left-hand side was featured in a Lynn item story in the fall. His name is Leandro, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about his story next, but there he is with his family. You can go on to the next. So Leandro, I think, just exemplifies why this pandemic has been such a crisis for our neighbors here on the North Shore. He works at a school in Lynn. He has a job at the school, but in order to afford his rent was driving for Uber in the evenings. And I think, we all have to be aware, like, that actually is in one of the most expensive housing markets in the nation. Like, that's how people pay their rent and feed their families. It's by having a job and then having that extra job. And so when that was lost during the pandemic, I mean, he's a neighbor who actually didn't lose his job. He was still employed by the school, but losing that money that is how people actually pay for their rent, that meant he got behind pretty quickly. And so United Way was able to, through Lynn Housing Authority, to support him in paying his rent for the month and a little bit towards the next month, so that he could relax, right, and be present with those beautiful children. So that's something that we're proud of, but also really aware. And I think it's important for us to understand why that housing and income disruption is so linked, and people having housing is a factor of our resilience as a community. So you can go on to the next. I actually wanted to show people, this is what income disruption looks like in a community. So this is a heat map of Lynn, where actually a lot of our relief funding went out the most flexibly to households. We also were serving communities in Salem and Beverly and Gloucester and Rockport, but this is a heat map of the addresses. Actually, we took the addresses of households who received assistance and plugged them into a heat map. And I think what I have been really touched by for the last year is really just how widespread people's income disruption is. So how widespread is income disruption. So every one of those dots represents people. The bigger the dot, the more people on that street, in that neighborhood, that we were able to support through 6 nonprofits who are in coalition working together. Let me go on to the next slide. So actually go back one. So the only other thing I want to highlight for you is, so Lynn is a city of 100,000 people. We were able to support 1,200 households. And I think, for me, that is something that I will forever be proud of. But I also wanted to just take a moment and throw to one of my colleagues too, because actually I realized as we were getting on that we have someone on the call who's been part of our coordination meetings. So I wanted to give Yuri the chance to share a little bit about what it's been like for her to be able to respond. So Yuri, you're unmuted. Go ahead. What has it been like for you to be sort of responding to your community and to be participating in our coalition calls?
Yes, definitely. As soon as I heard that we had a collaborative in place, to me, aside from being able to help so many families stabilize themselves, the most important aspect was being able to have a community, a private collaborative group that within meetings, we were able to brainstorm and address so many more hurdles that maybe individually we would have had more difficulty being able to figure out, especially the best way to help so many families that were despaired, so many families that were lost, and so many that were scared overall. Scared because they didn't have options. They really didn't have options. And being part of the community since the age of 8 years old, I'm 36 and I lived in Lynn all my life, raised. And most of these people I've known some way from school, somewhere from their kids being in our programs at Catholic Charities, but it's just they embrace and they trust. And when they trust, you want to be able to be there. So through those heartfelt phone calls where they were crying, where you were crying with them, but you were able to tell them, hey, you have options. Thanks to the United Way and to this collaborative, you have options. You have options throughout from the agencies. You have options through our partners. You're not alone. Sometimes that was all it took, those words, you are not alone, during a phone call to reassure them that they will be able to make it. And I get overwhelmed because this is my family, my community. And to hear somebody say, thank you. I said, don't thank me, thank yourself, because you're here, you are doing it. You're showing everybody that you're looking for help and you're not struggling alone. And by not being alone, they were able to share the information with more people. And that's how all this came to realization when they trusted an agency and that agency said, trust the others. Go ahead. You'll be fine. You're undocumented. It's okay. Don't worry about it. You're hurting. Don't worry about it. We're here with you. You're going through COVID. We have food for you. Don't worry. And that really lifted up the spirits of so many in our community that I think we were able to rise faster and stronger because of that. And for me, it has been a blessing to be part of. Sophie, I want to call. she's in class. She's happy. They told her that she'll be able to stay with her classmates for the rest of the year. So she's very happy. But for me, it meant everything. It meant being able to connect the dots for those who did not know where those dots were. And those dots are shown in the heat map. And it's amazing how they interconnected. And to this day, they're so well connected. People are not suffering anymore. They know where to go. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, United Way and all the donors for being able to allow us to do this.
Thanks, Yuri. That's so nice to hear from you. It's such an honor to work alongside you. Another person I'd love for you guys to meet who's a total honor to work alongside is Deb and Serlian. Deb, feel free to unmute yourself and share from your heart as well.
Sure. So I am the executive director at Girls Inc of Lynn, and thank you for United Way and all of the donors. Much like what Yuri was saying, you know, I think early on when we first, a year ago, we knew that the most important thing was to stay in contact. You know, Girls Inc is built around relationships, and supporting girls socially and emotionally in their families was just so important to us. And you know, everything in those early days, from helping people navigate unemployment to, with the help of United Way, food insecurity. And then we were able to do remote learning, you know, for our elementary school girls. And I have to say that, we started at the end of June, and, it seems like a million years ago, and everybody was really tense, right? So you have this about a week or so of everybody being tense. Staff was uneasy, they were nervous, we had gone over the protocols, and girls, it wasn't the same Girls Inc that they were used to. But the best part was about a week and a half later, the girls started to act out a little. They started to push back, and we knew that everything was going to be okay. And you started to hear, my favorite part of the day to this moment is when I hear the girls after they do their schoolwork and they're doing their Girls Inc experience, the laughter coming upstairs here to the 4th floor. So that has just been so joyful. I think that for me, what United Way and the support does, Carly, when you were talking about partnership, that's a big part of it, but a big part of being a partner is trust. So, it's been, challenging. We've all had our challenges, but to know that United Way, our allocation was going to be there, and that you trusted us to use it in the best and appropriate way was it's gold. It absolutely positively means the world to us that we can make those decisions, and we have been able to continue remote learning. Our middle school and high school girls have been virtual, and we have been able to do that. It's different for us, but it's been good. It's been good, and I really appreciate your help through all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb. I'm so happy that you all got to hear from some of our partners. I think, I want us to move towards some, comments about recovery, but just as we make that transition, I would say, I think that these are the folks we're so proud to be working with as we think as a community about recovering. I was just listening to the news yesterday morning, and certainly hearing some stats that we've been tracking in our office for the whole year. We've got 10 million Americans at least who are behind on rent. As of now, it might be as high as 20% of renters nationwide who are behind on their rent. And I think as we think about how the pandemic has impacted households like the ones we've been sharing about, that's not surprising, right? And that's not going to change until families have childcare and can get back to work, and also until they have housing they can afford. So I think as we take what we've learned from the last year and move towards thinking about recovery, we at United Way are more committed than ever. I'll say, like, myself, that is a personal statement, but also a statement on behalf of my colleagues and my organization, and our regional advisory board. We are more committed than ever to really working towards being in a region where everyone has a home, where we close that gap of units needed for every person to have a home, not just so that they can safely quarantine, although obviously that's important, but so that they and their families can make a life and educate their children. These are really essential components, right? These are basic building blocks of what resilience looks like, whether it's resilience in the face of this crisis or another one. So we wanted to talk a little bit about recovery, and then move into we've been getting some good questions in the chat privately to me. So we want to move into some Q&A as well. Carly, do you want to talk a little bit about recovery?
Yep, I can start, and then Sarah, you can always jump back in with some examples as well. Do we want to put up the last slide or no? Do you want to?
Sure, yeah, Robin, would you put up the last slide?
So you'll see on this slide, yep, that one right there, our vision for recovery, and it has a number of components. The one thing I want to say across the board with all of these is that we've come to them, and we've come to the strategies that we want to enact by really deeply listening. I'm hoping that's what you're getting out of just hearing from Deb and Yuri as well, is that we're spending our time really hearing about what is needed from community members, from our partners, and moving forward with that. One big piece of work that kind of is all encompassing of this is, what is our impact work going to look like going forward? So I know there's been questions in the chat about, like, how long is recovery going to take? We know it's going to take a long time. We know that probably some of our strategies that we have going on right now are the right ones, but we probably don't know everything. And so we're actually kicking this off today, in fact, at 4 o'clock. We have a meeting where we're starting to think about, with some outside help, what should our strategy, our impact strategy look like going forward? And we're going to be entering into probably, a several month process where we're going to come out to the North Shore, to all of our regions. We're going to talk to our agency partners, talk to community members, talk to other stakeholders, our corporate partners and donors, and really ask them where they see United Way being able to make the biggest impact. And from there, that's really going to help drive our next iteration and our next strategy. And what I'm really hoping for in that process is that we're going to be able to put out some pretty bold goals about what we'd like to see in the community, and then really think about how we can all come together and achieve on those. But I'll give you some specific examples on some of these right now. And I'm going to kind of move around. I'll talk about them a little bit all at once. One of the things that I mentioned when I was first talking is about a homelessness campaign. So we are kicking off a campaign, we call it United Way Home. And it's really around closing the gap around units that are needed to house everybody. Right now, we need, if you're going to think in terms of units, like 160,000 units if we wanted to provide housing, real housing for everyone. So for individuals, for families, for our young people, that is a huge number. We're not going to do that by giving out grants here and there. We're going to do that because we're going to try to change the system, and we're going to work with our government and our corporate partners and individuals to figure out how to do that. So that's a big piece of work that's going to be coming out. Sarah's actually doing a lot in that space. We're also looking at, when we think about economic justice and stability, we have some really good, strong work that we've been doing around financial coaching. Now is a time when a lot of people are reaching out to say, this crisis has showed me that I need to, really think about my own finances and come up with plans, or I'm worried about my credit. I'm worried about all these things. And so we want to take a strategy that's worked really well, which is this individualized process of helping people really say for themselves what their goals are, and then helping them work there and scaling that. So Sarah has actually been leading a lot of work along with the Essex County Community Foundation to think about how to get more people able to interact and take advantage of financial coaching. So we need to train up staff, we need to outreach to the community, get them connected, and move that forward. Do you want to add anything to that, Sarah?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Somebody else I know in the chat had asked about the $11 million that we put out, and was that just private? Was that government? All of that. It's a little bit of a mix. It's not funding that's really come down through the Recovery Act from the government yet, but it's been individual donors, corporate donors, and some government. But one thing that's just on the horizon now that isn't even in that number is we're working with the Massachusetts Association of Shelters. And we'll be giving, actually able to deploy $5.6 million for permanent supportive housing around chronic homelessness. And it's specifically around COVID recovery. So that is an astronomical amount of money that's going to go directly out to organizations across the state. So we're looking for, basically reaching out to the state agencies to say, this is what United Way is built for. We are able to help if we can. So we're running a whole RFP process, really thinking about how to put equity at the center of that work. Another thing that we're thinking about in terms of innovation is concepts like universal basic income. What if we could really think about giving everyone in a community a stable amount of money that they can use for those basic needs, so that they don't have to worry and they can move on and focus on other issue areas. So we're trying that right now in Chelsea. We're also looking at that for youth that are homeless. So really thinking across, outside the boundaries to think about how we can help families and individuals move forward. And then another thing to think about here is in terms of job training, and job loss, we're zooming in on specific industries that have had significant job loss. So one in particular is the hospitality industry. We work with an organization called BEST, which is a hospitality training program. So normally they're training people to go out and work in hotels, the airport, all sorts of things like that. We haven't heard a lot about that industry over this crisis. We hear a lot about restaurant workers, which is a similar population. But what we do know is that 90% of that industry is currently furloughed or unemployed. And and Best has done a survey with their members. They think at least 4,000 of them will never have their jobs come back. So imagine that, like that's completely, what are those folks going to do? So not only are we working on relief and getting folks money right now, but we're also thinking about what's going to be the next thing for them. So, focusing in on that area. A couple things I wanted to say in terms of early ed and school age. One is that for early ed, again, that's another industry where we're looking at things that might not be coming back. How can childcare, and especially family childcare, bounce back, and especially if people can't afford it. So we've been working directly with family childcare providers to help them on their business sustainability. We've been able to get them direct COVID relief, partnering with a number of other community organizations. And now we're looking at how do you continue to stabilize not only early ed, but also out of school time, really thinking about Deb, we've asked and really, required out of school time staff to act completely differently with no extra resources. And that's got to change. So we've been chatting, a little bit to some of the commissioners in EEC in elementary and secondary ed about how are we going to help transition young people back to in-person learning, whether that's school, out of school time, or summer. So partnering again on that as well. Sarah, do you want to add anything to what I've been saying there?
Yeah, no, I mean, our partners, what we talk about is how are we going to support the social and emotional well-being of students. That's the work we were doing before the pandemic. And just like in housing and financial coaching, this is the work that we were built to do. We have been doing it all along. And I think the pandemic has certainly suggested that we just need more of it. We need to do more and better on behalf of our families.
Right. And to think about, I know somebody put this in the chat, but what does a lost year of development look like for our young people and for our kids? And those are things that I think people are going to start examining, but I don't think we need a study to know that kids have experienced loss of social emotional development, connection, learning, and they have trauma. And all of that is going to need to be, pushed in. I recently was asking the commissioner of elementary and secondary ed about mental health supports for young people. How are we welcoming young people back in person and also wrapping around those supports? So I don't know if he understands as an issue, but I don't know if we have the answers yet, and we're really looking to our community to help us with those.
We got another question in the chat really around reimagining the safety net and as we plan for recovery, how technology is being used to provide services virtually, what community members, what we do for community members who don't have access to technology. I mean, I can say a couple of quick things from the community conversations that we've had in Lynn with our partners that you heard about on this call. One of the things we heard about was that for folks who had to immediately start doing school remotely, I think there was a hope that some of the low cost or free first 2 months sort of internet packages would be helpful. One of the things we discovered is for a lot of families that had arrears because maybe they had fallen behind on their bills, they actually weren't even able to get those turned on. And so United Way advocated on across its donors who are contributing to relief to allow for utility assistance to include internet. For a lot of folks, the kinds of programs that are out there don't include internet as a utility. I think if this crisis has taught us one thing, it's that that's a utility that everyone needs. And so we were able to support a good number of households in getting their arrears cleaned up so that they can get that internet turned on. And that was a result of just listening to the community. So I would say, I think part of reimagining it, right, is not only shifting programming to be able to function virtually, but also, really thinking about do we have access, right? Is there actually access? And I don't know that the answer for every program is to be virtual, right? And so really thinking about the last year and what we're doing with our partners is, being in discussion about what is it, what programs actually worked virtually and what ones don't, and how do we need to prepare ourselves to be able to get the best out of both. Carly, what would you add to that question?
So one of the things that popped into mind when I saw that question is that thinking about food banks. So this is something I had never thought of before. But we work with a number of very local food banks. One's at the Y in Malden. And what they were saying they were doing at the beginning of the pandemic, the way that they would get their food is that, you know, they would have calls with the Greater Boston Food Bank. It would be, you'd have to go there and look around and see, and then they'd get their food distribution. And as they were getting it out to their sites, they were literally taking iPhone photos of what they had in a room, sending the photos out and having people circle things on the photos, you know, and so, which is completely mind-boggling to think that that's how it was going. So they ended up developing a partnership with a tech company and creating, like, this was incredibly rapid, an app so that they could do online inventory that could face to other food pantry sites, but then also to consumers. Because one of the things, especially in COVID, folks were afraid to come out of their houses. If they did come out, they'd come all the way to the food bank and then they wouldn't have what they needed. If they had special diets or whatever it might be, it would really like put them at risk and waste their time. And so they were able to really, you know, revolutionize how they were doing their food bank. And now we have a number of other food banks that want to use that software as well. So I think technology is going to be just a critical piece of how I'm hoping it might be a silver lining out of this, that those innovations can move forward. Another great example is actually in the early ed out of school time space. This is in the South Shore. We had an organization called South Shore Stars, which does early ed and out of school time programming. They partnered with an early intervention organization. Normally everything would be in person. Kids would get assessed, you'd connect it to the schools. They rapidly changed and did the entire thing virtually. And now because of that, the data is like completely shared all across the board. And so actually, as the kids are transitioning into K-12 school, they're seeing a ton of benefits that they hadn't expected. So, Sarah, do you want to do the poll? I think the poll could be interesting.
Yeah. So we're going to launch a poll for you all. I think we were just reflecting on this being a year, a year since, you know, we all went remote and first started to adjust to the pandemic. And so we thought it'd be interesting for the group as we move towards closing today's session, just to hear from each other. What has been the biggest impact for you? Or you know, if you don't want to answer it for yourself, for your neighborhood or your circle of friends, but we'd love to hear sort of what for you has felt most heavy. And then we'll share the results in just a minute as soon as I see that it's populated. They're all still moving. Thanks for participating in this. You can actually select multiple items. All right, it looks like they've slowed down. I'm going to go ahead and show the results. For quite a while, as you guys were completing this, it was loss of a loved one was in the lead the entire time. And I think, you know, even just for a group of people this size, I think, you know, just to mark that's, you know, I think we haven't talked a whole lot about that through this lunch and learn, but, you know, I think that is what is sitting on so many of our hearts below all of this other stuff, right? So I just want to honor in the room that is what you're all experiencing. And then second of all, we're not at all surprised to hear that loss of in-person learning. It's a huge loss for your children and for our children. And so I'm glad that the notes on this call have been really around linking arms, but I think this is true, right? This is, and I hope that, I think what we talk a lot about in our team is our hope is that as we've all so much experienced these two losses, that they will help make us people who are more compassionate, right? More empathetic. That as we experience these losses, they wouldn't only be our own losses, but they would be losses that really push us towards greater empathy and understanding in our communities. Because these are what's sitting on your hearts all this last year. And then, you know, people have been impacted by income disruption and loss of childcare as well. So I will stop sharing those results. Carly, where would you like to go next? Do we want to move along?
Yeah, I think, we want to turn it over to Rodney Sinclair to give a few words. And, you know, really, I want to thank you all for participating today. This is certainly the work that I am thinking about day in, day out. And as a parent, a lot of this has hit home. I selected both of those things, the loss of in-person learning and loss of a loved one. One of my uncles just passed away from COVID just now. And so it also reminds you that this isn't over and it won't be over for a while. So thank you all for joining, and Rodney, over to you.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you so much, Sarah. You all did a great presentation. Matt, thanks so much for leading us today. My name is Rodney Sinclair. I am owner of Sinclair Real Estate Group. I'm also the co-chair of the North Shore Regional Advisory Board. It is truly, truly a pleasure to be here today, just to see all of you all here, to listen to us, hear about the United Way and the campaign, Communities Can't Wait, and just to see all of the folks that are, impacted by the issues that we talked about today. It's interesting. I think that poll shows that, it's not just an income issue, right? We're affected. Our families are affected. We're affected as people, right? And we all come to this table today just trying to figure out, okay, what's my place? How do I continue to do the work I need to do, but also to give back and to be supportive of all of those individuals, right? And, whether it's your uncle, your aunt, or the person down the street, how do we continue to just be available in some form or fashion, whether it's through giving, our donations, or just through giving our time and energy. And so I bring that up because it's been really important for us as the North Shore Regional Advisory Board to figure out, okay, how do we increase the engagement of people in the North Shore around these issues? One of the amazing things that I think you all have gotten to know about the United Way is that we don't just give money to an organization. We give to a mission. And that mission is to help families. It's to help them get out of homelessness. It's to help them with their kids, to prepare their kids for school. We give towards a mission. And there's so many organizations in our community that help. And so there's a lot of work that we have to do. And so I love the United Way because of that, because it's really mission driven, and it's easy to get behind. It's easy to get behind the family. It's easy to get behind our children. But there's only a few of us, right? There's not so many of us, and so we want to really continue to expand our reach by bringing on other individuals that care through this idea of a leadership council. And I really want you to think about this as an opportunity for you to get more involved. The Leadership Council really is a way of, I think, formalizing an effort to reach out to a larger group of individuals that care, to give their time, give their energy, and help us to continue to reach out further or create a further reach around getting donations. It's never enough. Just to be completely honest, it's never enough. There's so much more we need to do. And as you all know, folks here in the session here, you're on the ground level. You know that there's more to do. There's more ways in which we can make our dollars work for us. So think about if this is something for you. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk to you about how you can get involved with the United Way. This session today is not the end either. We will be having another session in April that takes a deeper dive into the impact of our giving. We're going to be talking with other providers, other institutions that we support throughout the region to talk a little bit more about how our dollars are affecting folks on the ground level. And we think that that's really important, just not to just continue to ask you, but to show you really what our work is doing, how we're impacting folks on the ground level. And as you see today, there's a lot of ways in which we're making that impact. So please continue to take part. Look out for our email and other notifications about future events. Participate. If we can all just make a vow to bring one person to that event, we'll go from 22 to 44 very quickly. And I think that's something that we all can do, because I think once you get somebody in the room, they really see that this is important work. So please continue to participate, continue to reach out to us. We look forward to meeting you all on a deeper level, and hopefully we see you in the future.